You're listening to the Security Matters podcast. I'm David Puner, a senior editorial manager at CyberArk, the global leader in identity security. Let's take a quick trip back to 2020, when the global race to develop a COVID-19 vaccine was on, and the groundwork for distributing it around the world was already underway. While scientists worked in labs, cybercriminals and nation-states lurked in the shadows, threatening to disrupt progress. At Johnson & Johnson, the stakes were enormous. Delays didn't just mean downtime, they could impact lives. Hospitals, regulators, third-party manufacturers, and global supply chains all had to be secured fast. Leading that charge was Marene Allison. Today on Security Matters, Marene joins us to reflect on her extraordinary career, from West Point to the FBI to nearly 13 years as CISO at J&J, a Fortune 50 company with more than 138,000 employees worldwide. We unpack identity, innovation, trust, and what it means to lead in moments of crisis, whether it's a zero-day exploit or a vaccine rollout. Oh, and if you've picked up a pint of organic blueberries lately, you might have already sampled a sweet side of Marene's post-CISO pivot. Let's dig in. Marene Allison, retired CISO, Johnson & Johnson. Thanks so much for coming on to Security Matters. Really appreciate having you here.
David, thank you for having me. It's great to be here.
Thanks so much. Let's get right to it. You've had an extraordinary journey from West Point to the FBI to leading cybersecurity at one of the world's largest healthcare companies. And you're also our first guest that we know of who's a member of the Florida Blueberry Growers Association, which we'll probably try to get to later on. What inspired you to pursue a career in security?
I was at West Point and I was looking at the branches, and I had taken electrical engineering as my engineering sequencer. And it's already a lot of engineering, 21 credit hours a semester for a couple of years. And so maybe my class rank wasn't high enough to get into either engineering or into aviation or into Signal Corps, which is a precursor to computers. And so I decided that the branch that had the best opportunities for women and men at the time that I liked, I decided to go military police. And that's the story of how I could get here.
In the military police, what kind of things were you doing at that time that sort of helped to foster that career in cybersecurity later on?
Probably the best part of it was understanding how to manage an organization, the leadership skills that you get as a second lieutenant. The skills then were road controls, convoys, security for major events, kind of the white glove MP, and then the fighting in the woods like infantry. So I don't think that many of those skills, other than the leadership skills that you learn with a group of 30 and then 120 people in a company, would it really translate into cyber, other than it was national security and securing our nation.
I should mention that at West Point, you were in the first class that included women. At the time, did you realize that this was a momentous thing, or was it something that just happened to be happenstance?
I didn't realize the magnitude of it at the time. I think by the time as a senior or firstie, as we are called, the cadets that are there even today, all they're looking for is to graduate. Can I make it through and graduate? And it wasn't until years later did I realize, oh, wow, this was pretty interesting, because you have to realize in 1974, women couldn't get a credit card by themselves. Women weren't allowed to have families in the military. And even when we joined West Point, up to 1978, we were part of the Women's Army Corps. We were not part of the regular Army. And it wasn't until years later that I realized that, wow, really the changing of what women could do, serving in national security, serving in the military, and even serving in law enforcement, because it wasn't until the early 70s with Title IX where women could serve in law enforcement changed.
Fast forward a few years and we get into the cybersecurity world. Let's talk about being a CISO and just sort of, I guess, level setting here at the beginning. Overall perspective. What does it mean to be a mission-driven CISO in today's environment?
That is a huge thing to unpack, but it's having an understanding of A, what your company does and what they're producing. It also is understanding the principles that are needed in cybersecurity to defend and protect the company that you're a part of, and also to understand where you fit in national security. Are you a critical infrastructure company? What do you produce? What is it importance to the nation?
So you spent almost 13 years at Johnson & Johnson, retiring in 2023. What was your biggest cybersecurity challenge during your time as CISO at J&J?
There's a couple of ways to look at this. One is the technical challenge of bringing a large company around the world as they're consolidating their IT and bringing their cybersecurity game up. That was certainly a challenge, not one that you can't do. And certainly I had the support of my CEO, my CIO, as well as the board of directors to get that done. But the largest challenge overall was helping Johnson & Johnson in securing its systems and its production facilities to bring the COVID vaccine to the table in less than 13 months.
What were the primary underlying challenges with that other than the obvious?
Let's see. All your third parties that help you to create a drug, China and Russia and Iran, all trying to stop you from not getting it done. Yeah, no challenge at all. In reality is that a mission-driven CISO understands what their company does, how it works and operates. And in pharmaceuticals, where it takes 10 to 12 years to bring most regular drugs to market, to do a vaccine that quickly accelerated, and to make sure that the team was aware of what was going on, working with all the different departments that maybe you had a relationship in the past, but all of a sudden they were front and center. And then understanding all the third parties that you have to deal with, between the manufacturer of product to the regulatory agencies, whether it be the FDA or it is a European Medical Association, and then the delivery of vaccine throughout the United States, and working with the federal government to ensure what was going on in this space so that we didn't have any issues throughout the whole process.
So at that point, you're about a decade into your tenure there at at Johnson & Johnson. So understanding what a company does and how it does it, I would presume you probably knew it pretty well at that point. How long with an organization like that did it take to get up and running and to really truly understand it inside and out?
So Johnson & Johnson being so large and at the time was three different divisions. Not only did you have the pharmaceutical, but you also had a consumer division that was spun off as a company called Kenvue, which was all your over-the-counter type products and Tylenol. And then you had medical devices. So I think if I was there another 20 years, I'd almost get to know everything they did and how they did it. And that's where, as a CISO, going in and every time you're looking at a new line of business and having conversations, what I learned is you have to understand the nuances of the business and the environment that they're in. So medical devices in Asia is different than medical devices in the United States. And so part of it is making sure that you're open and understanding. There's the cybersecurity. We got that. I got that piece. But then it's, okay, how is my business? How do they need this? And how is that delivered so that they're most effective and that it works for them and they accept the solution that needs to come in place?
Going back in general to the CISO role, how have you seen the CISO role change over the last few years, especially in large, complex organizations?
I think the biggest change was when CISOs started going to board of directors and what their role was there. It was seen as a position that was much different in the past. And I'll say the CISO was kind of like the head of physical security, where you had a C role, but it wasn't of the magnitude of the other C-suite executives, chief operating officer, chief financial officer. As we changed into reporting to the board and we saw the impact of ransomware on companies and being able to bring down hospitals, what you saw was that CISO role start to evolve into a true C-suite position.
So then getting into the nitty gritty of it, with the explosion of cloud services and AI, identity has become the new perimeter.
Oh, identity was always the perimeter, Dave.
I'm glad you pointed that out.
It's just that zero trust people thought, hey, we'll keep it to the side. And now everybody's bringing it up. It's always been the fundamental. Who touches your data and why are they touching it and how much access do they have and where can they send that data? That's always been the security problem.
Thanks for coming on to Security Matters. It's been a great interview. Appreciate it. How should CISOs be thinking about identity security today, and identity for that matter?
You have to look at it as more than some of what I'll call the easier places to secure. Detect and protect in the network. Not that it's an easy thing to do, especially with advanced malware coming at you or 0 days, but it's much easier than truly understanding the entire identity structure. If we go back, having IDs and passwords and having applications that have been developed, and many times that identity structure was put into the applications. Today, all the applications, it's going to externalize. There's going to be APIs. There's going to be extensions. You are not going to have it inside that application like you do in some of the more legacy applications. In a corporation, you have everything from CFO or finance people that have built little small apps or widgets that they're using that have identity structures to bots, the Blue Prism type, where a third party may have set something up. And you have to understand all the areas that the data is, who it's being accessed by, what it's being accessed by. And it's not an easy proposition. In the old days when there were apps and mainframes and RACF, it was relatively a two-dimensional problem versus today where we're seeing 3 and 4 dimensions of identity.
So then in a regulated industry like healthcare, we've talked about data a couple times, and I'm sure it's going to come up a few more times, but how do identity and identity security factor particularly into healthcare cybersecurity in the context potentially of data and whatever else you can think of?
So probably the best thing that happened in healthcare was the HIPAA, and which was around protected health information around patients.
Mm-hmm.
And that at least set the foundation in healthcare that we needed to understand data and where data was and who was accessing it. But as you look into something like pharmaceuticals, where you also have de-identified clinical data and you'll have proprietary data around molecules, understanding where all that data is and how it's accessed and where it goes, especially as we move in. I mean, the cloud was most difficult in that you had to, okay, where is it going? And what kind of systems is it residing on, and who could potentially have access to it. But as we go into AI and it opens up huge data sets, it can be an explosion of your data going outside your network and people aren't aware of it. And it's potentially more dangerous in healthcare with people's data, but all in financials. I was talking to a group of CEOs this past week, and one of the things, there were small companies, a couple of M&A companies, a couple of financial investment companies. And the idea, they love Chat GPT and using Chat GPT. And I said, yeah, use it, but know what you're connecting to. Because as soon as you start opening it up to databases, it's going to take all your data out. And is it data you want out, or is it your client data? And if it is your client data, it will become a brand problem more than a security problem, but it'll ultimately be solved by cybersecurity people.
So then, while on the subject of AI, how is AI transforming both offense and defense in cybersecurity?
There's no way a CISO today couldn't be using products that have AI embedded in it. Whether it's stated as AI, it's at least machine learning. Because there is no way, when you have billions and billions of events a day, that there's going to be analysts that are going to be sitting there and looking at it and seeing the correlation, when you can do that all through machine learning. And then ultimately that machine learning will bring you to AI. And most of the technology that's out there, that's the advanced technology, has AI built into it to help it to understand what's going on and to present potential incidents or events that may be occurring in your space.
Knowing that both bad actors.
It's my friend. It's
Yeah,
my friend.
it's your
AI
friend.
is my
It's your
friend.
friend.
But it also, and I look at it, I've been around a week or two there, David. So I look at it when voice over IP was coming out. You remember those days?
Mm-hmm.
And it was, oh my God, we're not going to be able to know where a 911 call came from. Oh, this is bad. We should block it. We shouldn't use it. Can you imagine? We wouldn't be having this call today without voice over IP.
Right.
Right? I mean, there's good and bad, and we have to utilize it for good versus evil. Now, the evil will be evil, and we'll have to then have controls put in place so evil doesn't happen.
Is it always going to be good trying to catch up with evil, though, or is it not necessarily that equation?
Well, it depends upon if you consider innovation evil.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
I consider innovation like we have to be there. That's the only way cyber is going to stay ahead of the curve. Innovation will create issues that will have to be solved. But without that innovation, we're not going to get to the next place.
Really interesting. I like the way you put that.
And so it's easy to say AI or cloud or voice over IP are evil, but it's part of the innovation that we deal with every day. And so there'll be people that are CISOs that get to defend their companies because a new innovation came out, but there'll also be people in those innovations that are creating the solutions so that we can operate securely.
Does the rise of AI make the CISO job easier or harder?
Both.
Okay. How?
I can look back to the day of RACF and mainframes, or steel piping stuff between, when I was at A&P, our mainframe was in Maryland and our corporate headquarters where it was in New Jersey. And yes, steel piped it all the way through. But I got green bar reports out of it, David. They weren't very, I had 5 different districts with 35,000 different SKUs, and they were all different. Frito-Lays in one place was salami in another place. And so those days are gone, right? It's all about data. We all have smart watches on that are monitoring our data, looking at AFib, looking at what our heart rate, did I get my walk in? Did I sleep right? All that data is potentially could be used for harm, or it could be used for good.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm going on the good side.
I currently have 910 steps today, so probably not ideal data.
Oh, come on now.
Nor'easter out there. I gotta do something about that after this interview, that's for sure. Let's go to machine identities for a little bit here.
Aha, my friend.
Yes. All right. So, what are the biggest blind spots organizations have when it comes to securing machine identities?
Machine identities tend to be the purview of the infrastructure department and not the cybersecurity department. That'll be the biggest blind spot. And that also, even people identities traditionally have been more infrastructure than with the CISO. And so understanding the full stack of identity and the identity around the data and where it goes becomes an extremely important part of the CISO's purview, even if they don't own it.
How do they wrap their heads around that? How do they get control around that? We just recently put out our identity security landscape study, just released, found that machine identities outnumber human identities now by more than 80 to 1. The previous study had it, I think, somewhere around 45 to 1, and that was just about a year or so ago. So obviously, an exploding number of machine identities. How do we keep up?
Well, we use technologies like CyberArk and Venafi. That's how we do it. I wouldn't even say this is one of those, hey, you can do this alone, you can build it yourself. No, just buy, Venafi itself. And I've known them for years and used them in the companies that I've been for years. You have to be able to manage that. And if you want a way to see how unmanaged it is just look at how many certs expire in an organization.
Mm-hmm.
And who manages that? The CISO always gets yelled at because the cert expired, but rarely do they have the ownership of managing all the certs and making sure the identities, the handshakes are right.
Venafi now, of course, part of CyberArk, acquired last year. Let's move on to trust. Trust is a word we hear a lot in security. What does it take to build and maintain trust with stakeholders from the boardroom to the front lines?
I don't think I've had a problem with trust with any of the organizations that I've worked with or the stakeholders I've worked with. It's because I come in wanting to learn about their business and what they're looking for versus giving them a list of, hey, this is what you must know and you must do this. I find having tabletop exercises with executives and then 3 weeks later the exact subject of the tabletop exercise occurs brings a lot of trust with people. And to be able to be honest, hey, we know this. No, I don't know if this is going to happen, but this is the potentiality of it. And cyber starts becoming a risk just like any of the other business risks, and not trying to elevate it into something larger than it is, but also making sure the importance of it stays relevant. I know the board presentations, I had a CIO, Stuart McGuigan, who always said, Marene, just throw in a little engineering so they know how smart you are. And we'd always just put a little bit in, but most of the time the presentation was to give them words that they understood and what things meant so that they understood the attacks that were coming at and where they were coming from, how the landscape changed, what we were doing to secure ourselves, and what things we were looking at. And I think being open and honest, even when you don't know the full answer, is always the best policy.
And then what about trust when it comes to patient trust in healthcare? And I guess that would probably factor in with data.
HIPAA was very prescriptive around what you were going to do with the data. And so what I found was HIPAA was a very good way to build a program around patient data. And so if you secured it in those manners, now, of course, what we originally did in 2002 to 2005 is much different today. But the reality is the best thing about patient data is knowing where you have it and who has access to it and being able to show that and be able to monitor it is the best way to create trust. Don't lose their data.
Mm-hmm.
That sounds kind of simple, but don't let people access it who shouldn't, and don't lose it. And you get trust.
Okay, thank you. We've already touched upon innovation a bit, but How do you balance innovation with governance and compliance, especially in regulated industries as a CISO?
I love the IT guys that are always trying to fidget with something and come up with something new. And what I found in most of the healthcare organizations that I've worked with, the ability to create a sandbox where people can play and create the technologies that they're trying to develop. The one thing that most IT people will try to use, "Oh, well, we have a database, let's use this database," and that's real data.
Hmm.
And the answer is, "No, we can't do that. Let's de-identify it, let's do something," and then set up the parameters. The other thing that we saw, and especially as a company like Johnson& and Johnson is trying to move to the cloud, is trying to change what the standards were for, say, the regulations or our regulatory environment and have equal. So in the olden days, it might be show physical evidence of log data. And then when you go to the cloud, physical evidence of log data would be truckloads and truckloads coming from Google or Amazon, which is not feasible. So it's also helping the regulatory and translate into what is going to be required around the new technology. The other is never say no. Let's say, let's look at it and see what it has. So, do you remember before smartphones were out and we had a BlackBerry? We all had a Bez server on board and it was secure and we were running that thing and it was costing us a lot of money to run it because we had to have people do it. And then they came out with, hey, we could do it outside the company. And companies like Ironport came out. Well, it was easy. The tech people were like, yeah, this is going to be, it's in the cloud. This will be great. But working with the security teams, being able to say, oh, wait a minute, right as it transitions here, the passwords aren't encrypted. If somebody puts a sniffer right there, everything's going to go out. So let's talk with these companies and see what we can do and where their roadmap is. And working with companies with their roadmaps to see where it's going to meet the corporate standards for security, and then having them move there. And a lot of that is a lot of extra work, but it's secured the company and helped us move very quickly to smartphones.
So many things that you have to be prepared for as a CISO. You have to be prepared for the unknown. How can CISOs prepare for the unknown, and how can they best position themselves to anticipate and respond to evolving threats?
As a CISO, I did not have my hand a lot into the venture capital world or any of the PE of what was going on. I had my security architect do that so that I could make financial decisions on the technologies based on what was provided to me versus personal relationships. You have to have a group of people in your organization that are looking at the new technologies out there. My security architect and I, we always used to love the RSA. We always did the back row,
Okay.
right? Not the front row, not the big booth, but the back row. Who's back there and what are they coming out with? Looked at GRC software for probably 10 years before they hit the floor and they're off running. Having the meetings with the small companies. As we went to the cloud, there weren't good, there wasn't a Wiz or a Daz out there to help us that you could just bring them in. We were using small companies to figure out how do we get the best in breed for what we're doing, and then how do we secure it in another way till that technology is going to get there. Knowing where your tech people are headed helps tremendously. Knowing where your business wants to go helps tremendously. And bringing those together like a big Rubik's Cube of, okay, do I need the best right now? No, maybe I don't need what, the Army needs, but I need this something over here that's going to protect us till we get to here. And maybe I can encrypt data at rest or encrypt data at use, which will get me over the hump until something else changes.
What do you miss most about being in that CISO seat, and what do you miss least?
I miss my team. I had about 600 people around the world. I love visiting them. I love working with them. I loved hearing their ideas, their point of views. They taught me so much. I don't miss sitting there awake, 20 hours a day, looking at stuff around the world as the vaccine is being created and wondering, is that goes bump in the night? Is that going to be the next DDoS attack? What's going to happen? Are we defended enough? I do not miss the operational part of it. And from the time I graduated from West Point at 21 until I retired, a little over 40 something years of operational work. I'm happy to ride my horses and pick blueberries.
Yeah, I mean, that's a lot of stress. Were there any kind of tricks or routines that you had in order to be able to manage that stress?
For a long time, it was running and doing other things. I'm one of those, I find if I'm doing something that completely engages me. So, like if you're downhill skiing, right? You're doing double black diamonds. If you think about work for even a millisecond, you are down.
Yep, absolutely. Been there.
So doing those type of activities, and same thing with my horses. If you're riding a horse and you're jumping or you're out in the woods galloping, if you think about anything else, you're on the ground. So I've learned stay off the ground and relax your mind, and your body will come with it.
That's really great. And I want to get back to the blueberries in a moment, but first, mentioning the team and missing the team. As far as organizations go and organizational culture, how can organizations create a culture that attracts and retains top cyber talent?
You have to look at what you have and then grow a team that's going to meet the organization that you're with. And there'll be some organizations that will have, you know, I have 100 people, I'm going to have 100 engineers. But what I found was I needed people with all different types of skills. Having an engineer do your security awareness and education program, not the best use of their time, right? Good people, they probably can do it at, a B level, but let's bring somebody in that has the gift of gab and can have the conversations and works with the business and get an A plus person in front of them that they're going to listen to. Does the person have to have all the skills of the security engineer? No. You have a security engineer and they talk to each other and they can help each other grow in their organizations. I took someone that was a police officer in Ohio and he ran my physical security for me when I worked at Medco, one of our C2 dispensing plants out in Ohio. And I sent him to cyber forensics course. He tells me today, and he's now the CEO of his own company that does cyber recruiting. He told me that he didn't even barely know how to turn on a computer. And then he became a cyber forensics guy and now is pivoted over to understanding cyber talent to hire it and develop it. And so it's taking these jewels and listening. And I would bring my 5 or 6 top captains in, and many times we would all disagree. And I told them they each had a vote. We were going to do it democratically, except for I had 1,000 votes.
Yeah.
And they still laugh at that, where ultimately I was in charge and I was going to be responsible. So I would have to make the decision, but we'd make it with everybody's input. And I'd have the deep technical, I'd have the people, the BISOs, the business, I'd have my application security people. We'd all sit there and figure out what is going on before we made a decision.
So that's really interesting that you've got all different types of talent, and it's not necessarily one skill set or background that makes for somebody who would be a great cybersecurity practitioner. But then, as far as cybersecurity leadership goes, CISOs, what qualities do you look for in the next generation of cybersecurity leadership?
Today we are lucky. because the colleges and universities are actually teaching cybersecurity. Back in the day, I had Fortran programming, okay, not Python, Fortran. And there weren't networks. And so you had to learn OJT to speak. But what I would say is today we have people that are learning in the universities, but which will allow them to come in with a breadth of knowledge and understanding that maybe wasn't there 40 years ago. But they will also have to understand people, because ultimately it will be their people they'll be the ones that say, hey, I'm looking at this AI and this real world database, and I think I found a problem. It is on the backs of people. And that's where I say the leaders are going to have that one foot in the technical side, one foot in the people management side, and the other foot, I think I'm using a Yogi Berraism there, and the other foot in understanding the business you're in.
Really interesting. So then going from your previous career as a CISO now into retirement, from the looks of things and what the internet is telling me, you're not exactly taking it easy. You've got a lot going on, including the blueberry farming, which sounds very low tech, but I'm sure there's a lot of tech involved in it. What are you up to these days? And I definitely want to know all about the blueberry farming.
Retirement is something I think people in the 70s did, and which included a Barca lounger. But I think today, most of the people I know who are, and I'll say, that's when you could say I'm a former CISO.
Right.
Okay. I've reinvented myself. I really, I should have been a cowgirl.
Okay.
So through some mentorees of mine, I now have 4 horses. Every morning I'm out there, out in the barn.
And this is in Florida, Northern Florida?
This is in North Florida.
Okay.
And barn time is just absolutely fabulous to clear your mind and to think of things, and to also, I'd say, de-stress, completely de-stress, because, when you're moving with a 1,000-pound horse, again, it's like skiing. If you don't watch what you're doing, you're going to be under it. So you have to be there. And before I get to the blueberries, I would tell you, I'm still doing things like this podcast. I'm still working with VC, small companies, and also working with PE firms, looking at new technologies. I'm kind of a geek at heart, and I didn't really do it as a CISO because I didn't want to sway decisions on things that my tech people needed to make a decision on. So I'm enjoying myself. And then who knew? I fell into the identity space, working with companies like Sphere and CyberArk and Venafi and Porsche, and they're just all sorts of companies that I found fascinating. And then I found that I started talking to a number of women CIOs in VCs. And now I have met a couple of these women and working with them to help them understand how to sell to CISOs, what space they need to go into, and then especially with the identity. Heard or read something recently that right now there's about $2.7 billion in the identity space. And over the next 5 years, it's supposed to grow to 6.6. So if anybody thinks identity is not important, seeing those numbers grow like that is certainly going to show how important identity is. And there's a lot of women CEOs in that space, which I enjoy working with. And then I'm also on the board of the Association of Graduates at West Point. I truly believe in giving back to the organizations that helped grow you and help set you up for success. And I'm president of the group for the West Point Women, which represents the 6,500 women West Point graduates. So I've given back. Check that box.
Yeah, remarkable.
But the most important one is my husband and I own an organic blueberry farm of 219 acres in North Florida. My husband worked in the FBI as a chief bomb technician for World Trade Center 1 and 2, and to be able to then reinvent ourselves. And it's not about the blueberries as much as, can I learn something completely new that I'm not an expert at and then become good at it?
Right.
And so we're now one of the largest organic blueberry producers in North Florida.
And can I get my hands on some of these blueberries up here at my local grocery store, or how do I get my hands on those?
They're through Michigan Blueberry Growers Association and the Nature Ripe label. And if you pull up the little clamshell, and if you see 1493, the year after Columbus, that's our farm. You have gotten the mother lode of berries.
Marene Allison, I can say with confidence we have to have you back on again soon. Really fascinating. Really great to speak with you. Thanks so much for coming on to Security Matters. Really enjoyed it.
David, thank you so much to you and the team for having me. I love CyberArk, always have, and have loved working in the identity space. So thank you for having me.
All right, there you have it. Thanks for listening to Security Matters. If you like this episode, please follow us wherever you do your podcast thing so you can catch new episodes as they drop. And if you feel so inclined, please leave us a review. We'd appreciate it very much, and so will the algorithmic wins. What else? Drop us a line with questions, comments, and if you're a cybersecurity professional and you have an idea for an episode, drop us a line. Our email address is securitymatterspodcast, all one word, @cyberark.com. We hope to see you next time.